This video is brought to you by MMI and their upcoming Heritage 38, a watch that blends traditional craftsmanship with contemporary design, driven by a unique micro-rotor automatic movement. Link to their Kickstarter campaign is in the description below. If somebody handed you a watch and its spec sheet, how confident are you that you would be able to take that watch and look at it and see whether or not it's a good watch, whether or not it's worth the amount of money that someone's asking for it? Do you know what to look for? That's why I'd like to focus in on this video. This video is going to be all about evaluating the technical aspects of a watch, the quality of the components that go into it, so that by the end of this video, you'll be able to clearly see what the difference is between something like a $2,000 watch and a $500 watch and a $100 watch. And generally, you would hope to see that as the price goes up, the quality increases, and that's usually the case, as we'll see in the watches that we're going to be looking at today. However, there are cases where that's not true, where you have a watch that is much better than its price would suggest, or a watch that is not as good as you would hope for the price that they're asking. And for this video, I've come up with a scoring system that I'm going to use to evaluate 9 different watches. This scoring system has 7 categories, including the movement of a watch, its water resistance, its crystal, its case, its dial, its hands and markers, and its band or bracelet. And across these 7 categories, I've allocated a total of 120 points. So theoretically, if a watch scores 120 points, it's a perfect watch. Now, as we go through this, you're going to see that a good watch around $100 might score like a 25, but when you approach something like $2,000, you would be expecting to get something closer to a 90 or 100. Now, I do need to emphasize that this video is going to focus on evaluating only the technical aspects of a watch. So we're going to look at the quality of the components of the watch, not the design or functionality. So we're only looking at half of the equation here. It's possible that you could have a very high quality watch that has a terrible design that makes it something that looks ugly, that doesn't work right, and is just not something that you want to wear. And a watch like that might still get a very high score here because, again, this video is only focusing on the technical side. So a follow-up video will be needed to cover the design and functionality aspect of it. The second thing I want to warn you about is that this video is kind of long, so I'm going to break it into 4 parts. There's timestamps down below. In the first section, we're going to look at 3 different watches in 3 different price ranges to get kind of a baseline for what these categories are and go into how you might evaluate them. And then I'm going to do 3 comparisons. So in each comparison, we'll take 2 watches that look somewhat similar, but then when we look at the technical scores, you'll see how one is clearly better than the other. The first of those comparisons will look at 2 incredibly affordable watches that I found on Amazon. This will be geared more towards maybe beginners who might just be looking around on Amazon, seeing all of these watches out there and be confused about whether or not one is a good watch or worth getting. The second comparison will be looking at micro brands. We'll be comparing a micro brand to a major brand to see the different areas where those 2 categories of watches might shine. And finally, we'll be looking at a comparison from a Chinese factory brand and a major brand, and really see in sharp detail just how amazing these Chinese factory brands have gotten at this technical side of watchmaking. So with that said, let's jump right in and take a look at our first 3 watches and try and get a good baseline understanding of what these categories are and how the scoring system works. So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. We're going to look at an extremely affordable watch in the Timex Weekender. You can buy this watch for about $45 on Amazon. Starting with the movement, this features a basic battery-powered quartz movement by Timex. And for this technical scale, the movement is the most important part of the watch, with the possibility of scoring up to a maximum of 30 points. However, with this very basic quartz movement, we're going all the way to the bottom, and it's only going to get a single point for that. As we move into higher tier watches, you're going to see a lot more points allocated for the various movements that are out there. But we have to start somewhere. Next, we're going to move on to another extremely important aspect of a watch's technical abilities, and that is the water resistance. Here, a watch could score a maximum of up to 15 points, but the Timex Weekender, as a field watch with only 30 meters of water resistance, it's going to get a 2. Next up, we have the crystal, and again, there's a wide range in terms of quality here. A good crystal would be made out of sapphire, it would have a nice shape to it, and there would be minimal reflections. The maximum score I would award in this category would be a 10, but once again, the Timex is going to score a 1 for its simple mineral crystal. Our next category evaluates the case and bezel of the watch, with a maximum score of 20 being awarded. To get a score that high, it would have to be made out of premium materials like titanium. It would have to have absolutely fantastic finishing. But the Timex Weekender doesn't have any of that in its case. This is one of the most basic cases you can get. It may look like steel, but it's actually made out of chrome-plated brass, which means that that silver coating will eventually wear out and reveal the base metal underneath it. Next up, we'll be looking at the dial of the watch, which can score a maximum of 15 points. And in this case, the Weekender does a little bit better than it has in the other categories. It's going to get a 5 due to the fact that this is an Indiglo dial, which means that it has an electroluminescent backlight, allowing the entire dial to light up, which is a really cool trick that Timex offers in this price range. And it's my favorite feature on this watch. Moving on to the hands and markers, there's the potential to score up to 12 points here, but again, these are about the most basic hands and markers you're going to see on a watch. The Timex Weekender will only score 1 point here. We'll be seeing some much better hands and markers as we go. Moving on to our final category, we're going to look at the band or bracelet that comes included with the watch. Here there is a potential to score up to 18 points. And since the genuine leather band on the Timex Weekender isn't that bad, it's going to snag 4 points, which is pretty good for a $45 watch. Now, adding all that up, the Weekender is going to grab a total technical score of 15, which I think sets a pretty good benchmark for watches under $100. I would say any watch that scores less than 10 points is not worth even picking up, and we will be seeing some of those watches later on. But for $45, I think this watch from Timex gives you an adequate level of quality. It's got a functional quartz movement, a decent leather band, and that cool Indiglo dial. So let's take what we've been learning and apply it to the sponsor of today's video, the MMI Heritage 38. Starting off with one of the most interesting parts of the watch, which is the movement. This features the Hangzhou caliber 5015A. So this is a high beat Chinese micro rotor movement. And variants of this movement are being used with more and more frequency among micro brands because it's such a cool looking and cool functioning movement. The movement itself is both beautiful to look at and interesting thanks to that micro rotor architecture, but it's also extremely thin. But MMI has additionally modified this movement to incorporate a turret-style date system, which they use on a lot of their watches. This is a very unique way of displaying the date, and I think it works great on a dress watch style like this. This is very similar to a pointer date where you have all of the dates around the outside of the dial, except in this case, rather than a pointer, there's a little red square that will highlight which day of the month it is. This is a very unobtrusive way to display the date. It doesn't ruin any of the symmetry on the dial, and I think it works great on a dress watch. And because of that level of uniqueness, this movement is going to get a score of 11 on my scale. Next, we're going to move on to the water resistance, and this watch is ostensibly a dress watch. It's only 38 millimeters across by 10 millimeters thick, and it has a very dressy dial. But despite that, MMI has managed to cram a full 100 meters of water resistance into this watch and incorporate a screw-down crown, which is incredibly impressive for a dress watch that's this slim. Now, I think part of the reason that they're able to do this does go back to that micro rotor movement. That does allow the case to be made a little bit slimmer. That allows them to allocate more technology into the water resistance. And so taking that into account, this watch scores a 10 on water resistance. For the crystal, we have a nice subtly domed sapphire with anti-reflective coating. That's going to score it an 8. Once again, we have a stainless steel case with a decent level of finishing. That will get it 6 points. We also have a beautiful multi-layer dial that is brushed in different directions depending on the layer that you're looking at. That gives it a nice, interesting contrast. It'll score a 5 for that. Good finishing on the hands and markers, along with a healthy dose of lume on them, is going to score them a 5 in this category. Finally, the watch is paired with a high-quality stainless steel bracelet that features solid links, solid end links, screw pins for adjustment, and a milled clasp, which will score it a total of 10 points in that category. So I think MMI is offering you a lot here in terms of a very interesting movement and design with that turret-style date, and it's implemented into a watch that is as beautiful and slim as a dress watch, and yet features the level of water resistance and after-dark performance that you would expect from a sports watch. There's a lot to like here, and when you add all the scores together, it hits a 55, which I think reflects that pretty well. And if you jump on the super early bird Kickstarter price of $468, it's going to be an excellent deal as well. Big thanks to MMI for sponsoring this video. If you're interested in checking out this watch, there is a link to it down in the description below. All right, let's move on to the most expensive watch that we're going to evaluate today with the CW Trident Lumiere. This is a $2,000 dive watch from Christopher Ward. It's among the highest tier watches that they offer, so we should expect to start seeing some pretty big numbers in terms of the scores that we're going to be looking at here. And starting with the movement, it does not disappoint. This features a high-end Swiss movement in the Sellita SW300-1. And just that movement on its own would warrant a pretty high score, but Christopher Ward has gone the extra mile and included a COSC certified version of this movement, which is going to guarantee a much higher level of accuracy than you would normally find. For that, the movement here scores a 20. Water resistance is also impressive. This is a dive watch. Like I said before, 200 meters is expected. They went the extra mile and included 300 meters along with the screw down crown. For that, it'll get a score of 10. Once again, on the crystal, we're getting a nicely domed sapphire crystal with anti-reflective coating. That'll get an 8. But that moves us on to our next really impressive category, which is the case of this watch. The Trident Lumiere is made out of titanium, which is going to boost its score up significantly. However, Christopher Ward has developed a name for themselves in terms of case finishing, and that is on full display here with the level of finish work on this case. It is beautifully shaped, beveled, polished, and brushed, all of which is made even more impressive given the fact that it is made out of titanium, which is a more difficult material to finish. And so this light catcher case from Christopher Ward will score a 20. The dial is nice with a soft, subtle texture to it. However, it's nothing particularly special. It'll score a 5 here, but the hands and markers, that's where things start to get a lot more interesting. Both of these are made out of globalite, which is essentially 3D loom. It is these blocks of loom on the dial and on the hands, which give the watch an incredibly unique look. I think it looks amazing in the daylight with the simple geometry that's going on here and that 3D effect. But since these are made out of pure blocks of loom, it also looks crazy at night when things get dark and everything starts to glow. The luminosity here is impressively bright, and so for all of that, the watch is going to get a score of 11 in terms of hands and markers. Last category is the bracelet, and Christopher Ward ends this one with a bang, scoring the maximum 18 points possible in the bracelet category due to the fact that this is a bracelet that is made out of solid titanium that features solid links, solid end links, a milled clasp, screw pins, and a very smoothly operating tool-free micro-adjustment clasp. And just like the case, everything is nicely finished. And so when you add all of that up, the Christopher Ward Trident Lumiere scores a 92, which is great, and that's what you would hope to get from a watch that costs $2,000. So we've taken a look at 3 different watches in 3 different price ranges, and I think each of these are good watches for the price. So if you look at the scores in this price range, it kind of gives you an idea of maybe what you would hope to get from a watch of comparable price. And so what I want to do next is pair up some watches. We're going to run some comparisons here. We're going to look at watches that are similar in style and type and price, but they're actually very different in terms of quality. So you'll see that when we score these prices based on the categories that we've established, you're going to see a pretty big discrepancy here. And so for our first comparison, I want to pair up 2 watches that are in the budget category. These would be watches that you might find if you're searching around on Amazon and you're just looking for a cheap watch under $100. There are a ton of different options there. A lot of them are sponsored. Some of them are not very good at all, and some of them are actually surprisingly worthwhile. Now, I live in Japan, so the options available to me here are going to be a little bit different from what you'll find in the States or other parts in the world. But I went and bought these 2 watches from Amazon Japan. The first is from a Chinese brand called Olevs. They are one of the most popular brands on Amazon in both the US and in Japan. At least that's what you would think based on how frequently they pop up in search results and how many reviews they have. This watch from Olevs is a dive style watch. It is heavily inspired by the Rolex Submariner, kind of an homage of it. It's a quartz powered watch, and Amazon sells it for about $43. When looking for a watch to compare to, I wanted to find a watch that was a good watch, something that I would be comfortable wearing, that's also a dive watch in a somewhat similar style. So if someone was looking for a watch like this Olevs, maybe a better alternative to it. And the one that I landed on was from a Japanese micro brand called Hyakuichi. I believe they only sell on Japanese Amazon. This watch is also an homage of the Rolex Submariner, but it has a kind of ice blue dial. But it's made here in Japan, and I picked it up for the equivalent of about $75. Let's start by taking a look at the Olevs watch, and there's a number of red flags here with this watch right off the bat. For instance, if you did a little bit of research trying to find this same watch from other sellers, particularly if you went to AliExpress, which you can buy it direct from China, I think AliExpress sells the same watch for about $14. So what you're seeing here is people either drop shipping this watch or buying it in bulk and then marking the price up significantly to offer the convenience of selling it on Amazon. And I get that. A lot of people have Amazon Prime. They like the return policy of Amazon. It does make shopping much easier to buy through Amazon versus direct from China through AliExpress. But you are effectively paying $14 for a $43 watch, and this watch is not worth more than $14, as we're going to see very quickly here. There's some other red flags that come up when you look at the stated specs. For instance, they say that this is a stainless steel cased watch, which is very hard to find in a $14 watch. The raw materials cost of a stainless steel case is probably going to drive it up over that $14 right away. Also on their website, they say that this watch has a Japanese quartz movement, which again is unlikely in this price category. But let's go ahead and take a look at the watch itself. And before we even get into evaluating the technical aspects of this watch, it just feels incredibly cheap in the hand, and it looks very cheap. I suppose if you have absolutely no experience wearing a wristwatch, you might think it was of decent quality. But if you have ever held any stainless steel watch, you're going to immediately tell that there is something wrong with this watch. So here's the scores that I gave it after doing a thorough evaluation of it. And you can see we're actually hitting a number of zeros here. The first zero it's getting is for the movement, because I opened this up and it does not include a Japanese quartz movement as they stated. This is a Chinese quartz movement, so extremely cheap. It's also getting a 0 for water resistance, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First off, they're stating this is a 30-meter water resistance, and this is in a watch that is a dive-style watch. And in that category of watch, you should have an absolute bare minimum of 100 meters of water resistance. 30 meters is not suitable for any kind of water activity, so having a watch that looks like a dive watch that can't handle the water at all. The other thing is when I opened this watch up, it didn't have any gaskets. It just had a simple press-on case back, and I kind of wonder if 30 meters is even overstating it. I don't think I've ever seen a less water-resistant watch than this, so it's scoring a 0 there. Next, let's move over to the case, and if this was actually a stainless steel case, I would give it a minimum of 5 points. For watches under $50, it's very rare to find an actual stainless steel case. More commonly, you'll get plated brass, which is what this actually looks like. This has an extremely high polish finish that doesn't look like stainless steel. It's too glossy, too bright. It looks like a chrome plating. And when looking in between the lugs, you can kind of see some artifacts of that plating. When you look at the spring bar holes, you can see some discoloration where I think you can see some of the base metal underneath showing through. Also, when I weighed this watch, it was extremely light, probably too light for it to be stainless steel. I could be wrong here, but I highly doubt that it is stainless steel, and so for all of that, I'm just going to give this a 1. The one surprising thing about this case is that it does have an actual rotating bezel. The bezel action is absolutely horrible, but it does work. You could use this as a timing function, which is a nice feature to have on a watch, so you get 1 point for the case for that. I'll give it 1 point for the dial, but hands and markers is going to get bumped up to a 3, and that's because it actually has a usable level of lume here. It's definitely not good lume, but it's actually better than I've seen in a lot of watches under $100. Finally, the band on this watch is getting an easy 0 as well. It's a terrible quality folded link bracelet that rattles like crazy, that has an odd finish and color that doesn't match the watch head itself. It feels absolutely awful on the wrist. I almost gave them a point for including a bracelet sizing tool, which was helpful, except that I used the bracelet sizing tool to size the bracelet, and the pins were so stiff that it actually broke the tool. All in all, this watch is going to score a meager 6 points, and like I said before, any watch that scores lower than a 10 I don't think is worth buying. Some people might find the look of this watch to be appealing, but I guarantee that nobody is going to appreciate the comfort or the feeling of quality of the watch, and it's probably going to break very quickly. It's definitely not worth the $43 you would pay on Amazon. If your budget is $43, you're probably much better off sticking with something like that Timex Weekender we looked at before, or maybe a watch from Casio. But if your heart is set on this kind of Rolex-style dive watch and you want that look, you should probably spend just a little bit more money and get something similar to this watch from Hyakuichi. This one is even more of a blatant copy of the Rolex Submariner, however it does have an ice blue dial, which makes it a little bit unique. But the materials and build quality of this watch are miles ahead of the one from Olevs. And that's immediately apparent when you look at my score sheet for it. This still only features a quartz movement, but it is at least a genuine Japanese quartz movement, so you'll get a point for that. Water resistance is where this is going to really stand out because this does offer a full 200 meters of water resistance with a screw-down crown, which means that this watch is fine for pretty much all water sports activities. It's an actual functional dive watch. And that's great to see in a watch that you can pick up for 75 bucks. I'm going to give it 1 point for the crystal because, again, it's just a standard mineral crystal. However, for the case, it's going to score a lot more points, snagging 6, because this is actually a stainless steel case. You can tell by the heft of it, the weight of it, it's much heavier. You can also tell by the finishing that's done here. While it is fairly basic finishing, you can see that there are brushed and polished sections, which gives the watch a nice look, and it's also something you can't really do with a chrome-plated brass case. And stainless steel is also much stronger. The dial is nice. It has a sunburst ice blue finish that looks pretty cool, so it'll grab 5 points for that. Likewise, the hands and markers, well, again, being a straight-up copy of Rolex, are done pretty well, and they also feature a nice application of lume. Again, nothing fantastic, slightly better than the Olevs in terms of brightness in the dark, so it'll score 4 points there. Finally, the stainless steel bracelet is a pleasant surprise. This is a bracelet that is of higher quality that I've seen on a lot of Seiko watches, costing 3 times as much as this. It features solid links with some appropriate finishing. It'll score 7 points for that, bringing it up to a total of 32 points. And while this watch does cost $30 more than the Olevs, the technical score is more than 5 times better, making this a far better value. For the second matchup, I want to highlight the value that you can often find when looking at micro-brand watches, and so we're going to take a look at Zelos' most recent release in the Helmsman, which I recently reviewed. I'm going to run it through the tech specs here and compare it to a pretty similarly priced watch from Seiko. Historically, Seiko has been known for making excellent dive watches, so we're going to be taking a look at one of their newest watches in this price range in the SRPL 13, also known as the Shogurai or the Baby Samurai. I have full reviews of both of these watches, so I'm not going to go too much in depth here. I just want to highlight the differences that come out when we grade them according to this technical scale. Pricing on both of these watches is a little bit complicated given that Zelos gives pre-order prices, which is going to drop its initial price down, and Seiko's kind of the opposite, where their retail price tends to be a lot higher than what you'll actually be able to buy it from sellers like Amazon, but they are still in the same general price tier. When we compare the movements of these two watches, the Zelos Helmsman has a Miyota 9015 movement, which is a premium Japanese movement. It is a better movement than the 4R35 that Seiko puts in theirs. It is more accurate, it features a higher beat rate, and it's also a little bit thinner. Seiko is going to punch back when it comes to the water resistance category, and this is the one area where I think Seiko still dominates the competition because they're one of the few brands out there that is doing certified dive watches in this price range. And I do think that this is important. If you're actually going to use your watch for professional scuba diving, which nobody does anymore, but if you were, you would definitely want it to be a certified dive watch to verify that that water resistance is accurate, that it has been extensively and independently tested. And that's why I think that you can make a strong case to say that any dive watch that has not been ISO certified is not actually a dive watch, it's just a dive style watch. Drop a comment down below if you disagree. Anyway, Seiko's going to score a 12 here because this has a full 200 meters of water resistance, it has a screw-down crown, and it does have that ISO dive certification. But the Zelos is not too far behind it with a score of 8. It features the same 200 meters of water resistance, the same screw-down crown, it just hasn't gone through the actual certification, which is pretty standard for the course here. Because people don't actually use their dive watches for professional diving anymore, very few brands go through the trouble of actually certifying them. But having a watch that has passed that certification, I think, is a cool thing. But I'm not going to give Seiko any credit for their crystal. This is a Hardlex crystal, so maybe it's a higher quality mineral crystal than you might get from other brands. Still, I'm only going to give it a 2. There are lots and lots of watches out there in this price range that are going to give you sapphire crystals, which I think Seiko should be offering, and that's what Zelos does. They're giving you a very high quality sapphire crystal. It's a boxed crystal that looks really cool in the watch. It also has anti-reflective coating, so it's going to score an 8 there. The case is another area where Zelos is going to come out ahead, at least from a purely technical standpoint. There's certainly an argument to be made for the case of the Seiko Shogurai, at least from a design standpoint. It's a case shape that is unique, beautiful, and connected to Seiko's heritage. And while the finishing on the case is good, it's nothing special from a technical standpoint, so I'm going to give it a 7 here. On the other hand, Zelos is giving us something special, and they've really gone above and beyond here with the construction of the case. Not only does it feature an inner rotating bezel built into it, but there's also a CNC cutout along the edges of the case, which introduces an extra level of complexity in the production of this case. And on top of that, the finishing on this case is done to an extremely high standard, something that you're typically not going to find from Seiko until you start spending over $1,000. Zelos is giving you significantly better brushwork and polish work than Seiko does in this price range. And for all those reasons, the case score here is going to get bumped up to an 11. The story is similar when we consider the dials of the two watches. Once again, dial work is something that Seiko is known for, but particularly in their divers, you're not going to get anything truly special or spectacular until you start spending a lot more money. The Shogurai is still very much an entry-level model when it comes to Seiko's Pro Specs line, so the dial that they're giving you here, well, perfectly fine, and in the case of this particular model, is a nice maroon color. Again, nothing special, it'll score a 5. Zelos here has gone with something incredible. Again, from a design standpoint, some people might say this is too much, and that's fair, but evaluating it from a purely technical standpoint, this is a very intricate and difficult to manufacture dial that has gone through a number of very involved processes to create this look. For starters, the dial is made out of titanium that has undergone a crystallization process that requires very high temperatures in a controlled environment to produce this crystallized pattern in the metal itself. This also increases the hardness of the titanium, which makes the next step even more difficult because they have then CNC'd this very intricate pattern, engraving it onto the dial, giving it a lot of depth and this very clear 3D effect. Finally, it's gone through an electroanodizing process that imbues the metal itself with this shimmering blue color. And all of these processes come together to create an incredibly unique and, again, very intricate, unusual dial that you rarely will see in this price range. There's not as much differentiation in the hands and markers. The Zelos ones are, again, of better quality, and the loom also lasts longer. But the difference here isn't nearly as stark as it is in other categories. The Zelos scores 2 points higher with a 6. But when we move on to the band, once again, Zelos is going to pull ahead here. Well, they both have good stainless steel bracelets. The Zelos is far better with better construction, better finishing, but most importantly, it has a very good tool-free micro-adjust system built into the clasp, which allows you to resize the bracelet on the fly with no tools. So in every way, it's just a better bracelet. It's going to score a 13 to the Seiko's 9. And when you add all of that up, the Zelos comes out with a full 25-point lead in the technical score, which is crazy, especially when you consider that these watches operate in roughly the same price category. And this is something that I think really highlights where the watch market is right now in 2025. Players like Seiko, who used to be considered the top of the line when it comes to value for the money, are really being replaced by micro brands, and as we're going to see next, by Chinese brands. At least when we're talking about a technical level, when we're talking about the components that go into these watches, the quality of the watches themselves. The area where I think Seiko does still have an edge is on the design front. And when you're evaluating a watch in terms of its quality and design, I do think that these two things are equally important. All right, for our final comparison, I want to focus on these Chinese factory brands that have been producing a lot of incredibly excellent watches for extremely low prices. So we're going to look at a watch from San Martin. This is an homage of the Seiko 62 MAS. And I don't like homages. I don't like these one-to-one copies of watches. But that's a design criticism, so I'll save my comments on that for another video. But it's not lost on me the irony of brands like San Martin creating homages of Seiko watches and producing essentially better watches than what Seiko is producing themselves these days. And I hate to keep picking on Seiko because they are still one of my favorite brands. And again, that goes back to because of the design strengths that they have, I often find myself gravitating to their watches, even over some technically superior watches because I like the design so much. But again, this is a video about technical side, so we're going to be taking a look at the Seiko 5KX, that Seiko 5 sports line of watches, because again, I think this really highlights where the watch industry is at in 2025. So this matchup is going to pit a Chinese copy of a Seiko watch that you can pick up for $150, and we're going to compare it to a genuine Seiko watch of a very similar style that costs $250. So Seiko's getting a little bit of an edge here. We're going to compare a more expensive Seiko watch to a cheaper Chinese copy of one of their watches. The first thing that you'll notice is that the movement score is identical, and that's because these watches use the identical movement, which is an important thing to keep in mind because the movement is one of the most important components in terms of the longevity of the watch, of the performance of the watch. It's literally what makes the watch tick, and yet San Martin is using a Seiko automatic movement, the same Seiko automatic movement, or virtually the same movement that Seiko is putting in this Seiko 5 sports model. But the Chinese copy is going to jump ahead because they're using an actual sapphire crystal with anti-reflective coating. This is a very good crystal, especially in a watch this cheap. Meanwhile, Seiko is still giving you their proprietary mineral glass that they call Hardlex, which is a much more scratch-prone material. The San Martin is going to get an 8 against the Seiko's 2. The case category is going to get a bit tricky because both of these feature very iconic case designs. However, they're iconic because they were both designed by Seiko. Again, the San Martin is pretty much just copying a Seiko case design for this watch. But again, we're focusing more on the technical side of things. They're both very good stainless steel cases. I would say that the San Martin has slightly better finishing, while the 5KX has a more interesting shape to it. But the San Martin is going to score some extra points by including a ceramic bezel insert instead of an aluminum bezel insert, and also having just generally better bezel action overall than the Seiko 5 Sports. So for the case and bezel, the San Martin will score a 9 versus the Seiko 6. The dial's kind of a toss-up. They both look very similar. The San Martin has an enamel dial, which is a premium dial. However, I don't really like the color of it or the way that it came out. It doesn't look that great to me. Still, I'll give it an extra point just for materials. It'll score a 6 to the Seiko's 5. Hands and markers are another toss-up. I'll give a slight edge to the San Martin. I think they're just a little bit better finished, and I think the lume also lasts just a tad longer here. Finally, looking at the band or bracelet, the San Martin just has a higher quality bracelet than the Seiko. Features solid links all the way around, solid end links, and a much nicer clasp. The bracelet on the Seiko is perfectly usable. It looks nice. It's fine. It'll score 7 points. The next category, water resistance, is kind of a sore spot here because the 5KX is very much an evolution or a de-evolution of the Seiko SKX, which was one of Seiko's professional dive watches that featured an ISO certified 200 meters of water resistance. However, on this current version of the watch, Seiko has dropped that down to 100 meters of water resistance that has not been certified. So it's only going to score 2 points for water resistance here because this is a dive watch or a dive style watch. It should have better water resistance than this. The San Martin, on the other hand, is giving you exactly what you would expect for water resistance. It features 200 meters of water resistance with that screw down crown. Again, something that Seiko doesn't even give you. It'll score 8 points here. When you total all of that up, this San Martin copy of a Seiko watch is going to score a full 21 points higher than an actual Seiko watch. And just to be clear here, when I'm using the term copy, I don't mean that there's anything illegal or illicit about San Martin copying this watch. They're not trying to pass it off as a Seiko watch. It's got their own branding on it. This is very common in the watch industry. I just don't personally like it, and it is a blatant copy of what Seiko has done in the past. That said, I definitely appreciate the quality of the components that San Martin is putting into this watch and the overall value that they're offering here. It is incredibly impressive, and it is really kind of embarrassing Seiko, who's the one that they're actually copying here in the first place. So we've scored a total of 9 watches in this video. Let's take a step back and look at where they all stand and see if we can see some patterns developing here. One thing that's immediately clear is just how good micro brands and Chinese brands are doing on the technical side of things these days. When you look at that Chinese watch from San Martin, not only is it beating out Seiko's budget-oriented 5KX watch, it's also beating out the Seiko Shogurai, which is a much more expensive watch. And in fact, when we look at this technical scale, what we see is that Seiko 5KX, that Seiko 5 sports watch, is actually tied with that Hyakuichi watch that you can get for like $75. From the technical side of things, the only place where the Seiko distinguishes itself is in terms of the automatic movement. Looking at the opposite end of this list, we can also see that at a watch costing $2,000, they are offering you some significant upgrades that are tangible differences between lower priced watches. That CW Trident is still coming out with our highest score by far. It's also the highest price watch by far. So that would make sense. At least you would hope it would make sense. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. Sometimes you are going to find some watches in this price range that don't have the greatest technical aspects to them. But one thing that this does show is that at least up into the $2,000 price point, there are still some very tangible upgrades that you're getting at that price that you don't see in lower priced watches so often. But I suspect that as you go beyond that $2,000 price point, you're going to see less and less technical differences here. But I should probably leave that evaluation to some other channels because I pretty much never look at watches above $2,000. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up the video. Thank you so much for sticking through all of it. It was a pretty long one today. Drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. I expect that there's probably going to be a lot of strong opinions among watch nerds out there, and I welcome your comments. I'd love to hear some feedback on whether you think I've placed one category too highly over another, if you think the scores are off. I'm thinking about using this scoring system more frequently in reviews going forward to kind of give, a more clear picture of the technical side of a watch. One thing I didn't mention in the beginning of this video is that I think the scoring system is really more appropriate for affordable watches. The most expensive watch that we looked at today was about $2,000. I don't think this system will be very good for evaluating watches above the $2,000 price point. Once you start getting into $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 luxury watches, the differences in terms of technical quality, I think, get a lot smaller, and really the difference comes into design and often the movements that go into it, the in-house movements and the complications that are created for it. But for watches under that $2,000 price point, I think there is a lot of variation in these technical categories. And so I think that this grading system would hold up pretty well. Again, big thanks to MMI for sponsoring this video. Link to their Kickstarter campaign down below in the description. And also, if you're interested in getting a watch-themed t-shirt like this one, you can pick it up on my website at justthewatch.com. That's going to wrap up everything for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you later.